I can't look at my wedding photos anymore. They used to make me smile. The white dress, the flowers, the string lights glowing above us. They used to remind me of the happiest day of my life. Now they just stare back at me like evidence. A crime scene caught in perfect lighting, framed and smiling. Because those photos don't show the truth. They don't show the lies I was walking into. Let's just call him Mark, the man I married. The man who stood at the altar with tears in his eyes, promising me forever. And let's call him David, my father. The man who took my arm that morning, who walked me down the aisle with steady hands, who gave me away like he was passing me into safety. But I wasn't walking into safety. I was walking into betrayal. Because the man who vowed to love me was lying. And the man who gave me away already knew. Even writing that now feels unreal. Like it couldn't possibly be my story. But it is. And if I don't tell it, it will eat me alive. When you imagine betrayal, you picture it in fragments. A text discovered, a secret whispered, a sudden unraveling of the trust you built. But you don't picture it wrapped in lace and vows. You don't picture it happening on the day you're meant to feel most secure, most cherished. And you certainly don't picture your own father knowing and saying nothing. That's the part that haunts me the most. Because betrayal from a husband, awful as it is almost expected. You hear stories all the time, wives blindsided, husbands hiding double lives. But betrayal from a father, from the man who raised you, who promised to protect you from everyone and everything, that's a wound that cuts even deeper. I look back now and I can see the layers. The way Mark smiled in the photos, his hand squeezing mine too tightly like he was holding something back. The way Dad's eyes looked proud, but also tired, almost weighed down. At the time, I thought it was emotion, the bitter sweetness of giving away his daughter. Now, I wonder if it was guilt. And the worst part is, I was blissfully unaware. I thought I was stepping into a forever that was solid, blessed by love and family. I thought I had both men on my side, the man who promised me a future, and the father who had guarded my past. But the truth is, they weren't standing with me. They were standing together, holding a secret I wasn't allowed to know. This isn't just the story of a cheating husband. It's the story of silence, of complicity, of the people who should have spoken up but chose not to. Mark's lies destroyed my marriage. Dad's silence destroyed my faith and family. And together, they left me standing in a pile of wedding photos I can't bear to look at anymore, because every smiling face, every bouquet, every toast is just a reminder that my aisle wasn't a path to love. It was a path to betrayal. I'll tell you how I met Mark, how Dad welcomed him, how I believed I was walking into a dream life. I'll tell you about the small cracks I ignored, the gaslighting, the little reassurances that covered a much bigger truth. And I'll tell you about the day it all fell apart, when I finally uncovered the proof that shattered everything I thought I knew, not just about marriage, but about family itself. But for now, all you need to know is this. The man who vowed to love me was lying, and the man who gave me away already knew. My name is Jean, and back then I thought I was the luckiest bride in the world. When I close my eyes, I can still picture the wedding day as I believed it was. The dream I carried since I was a little girl, the aisle lined with flowers, the music swelling, everyone I loved gathered in one place. The moment wasn't just about me marrying Mark. Let's keep calling him that. It was about family, unity, and love converging in a way that felt unshakable. I thought the whole world was on my side that day. Mark was waiting for me at the altar, eyes glassy, lips trembling as if he couldn't hold back the emotion. I told myself it was because he loved me so deeply, that this wasn't just ceremony. This was the start of forever. And on the other side of me, holding my arm steady, was my father. His hand was firm on mine, guiding me step by step. I remember glancing up at him and seeing pride in his face, a quiet kind of relief, like he believed he was handing me into safekeeping. All my life, he promised he'd walk me down the aisle someday, and in that moment, it felt like the promise had come full circle. That walk wasn't just symbolic. To me, it was sacred. My father's approval meant everything. His steady presence beside me, combined with the man I thought I could trust waiting at the end, it made me feel protected, chosen, loved from every angle. When Dad raised his glass at the reception, his voice cracked. He said, "I've never seen Jean smile like she smiled today, and I know this is just the beginning." I cried hearing him say it, because it felt true. The beginning of a life where I had both the man who loved me and the father who had always protected me united in one picture. That's what made the dream so powerful. It wasn't just about romance, it was about family. It was about a father's pride and a husband's devotion blending together to create a foundation I thought I could build forever on. People love to dismiss brides like me. They say we're naive, blinded by fantasy, too wrapped up in the fairy tale to see the truth. But I wasn't blind. I was trusting. I was standing between two men who both swore, in their own ways, that I was safe. And if you had been in my place, if you had seen the tears in Mark's eyes, if you had felt the pride in Dad's grip, you would have believed it too, because there were no cracks on that day, no shadows, no reason to doubt. Everything was perfect, or at least, it looked perfect. But what I've learned since is this. Sometimes, perfection is just a mask. And the mask can be held up with steady hands and smiling faces, even as the truth waits in the dark, ready to shatter everything. Before the aisle, before the vows, before the secrets I would eventually uncover, there was the beginning. And if you're wondering how I could have believed in Mark so completely, you need to see what I saw back then. I met him on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was standing in line at a coffee shop, of all places, drenched from a storm I hadn't prepared for, when he stepped in behind me and offered me his umbrella. I laughed. What good was an umbrella now, when my hair was plastered to my face? But he smiled, warm and easy, and said, "For next time." That was Mark. Simple gestures, quiet steadiness. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He didn't dominate a room or make grand declarations. He made small things feel safe. And at that point in my life, safety was exactly what I wanted. From that day, he showed up. Texts in the morning, calls at night. If he said he'd be somewhere, he was there. No disappearing acts, no vague excuses, no games. After years of false starts and disappointments, I told myself this is what real love looks like. Not fireworks, but foundation. When he met my father, I braced myself. David wasn't an easy man to win over. He always said, "Jean, one day I'll walk you down the aisle, but only if the man waiting at the end deserves you." His approval wasn't something you could charm your way into. It had to be earned. So I watched closely as Mark sat at our dinner table that first night, answering my father's questions with calm sincerity. No bravado, no arrogance, just honesty. When the night ended, Dad pulled me aside in the kitchen and said words I'll never forget. "Jean, he's the kind of man who'll protect you. Don't let this one slip away." That blessing meant everything to me, because my father's voice carried weight. He had been the one to shield me through heartbreaks, the one to remind me never to settle, the one who promised that when the right man came along, he'd recognize him. So when Dad said Mark was the one, I didn't just take it as an opinion. I took it as truth. From that moment on, my relationship wasn't just mine. It became part of the family. Mark slipped into that role effortlessly. He helped my dad fix a leaky pipe one Saturday morning, and I watched them laugh together in the garage like they'd known each other for years. He joined us for Sunday dinners, carving the roast when my dad's hands were tired, carrying groceries in without being asked. It felt seamless, like Mark wasn't just a man I loved, but a man my family could lean on too. And I leaned, harder than I realized at the time. He became the standard, the anchor, the measure I held the world against. He wasn't just my partner, he was my safe place. So when he proposed 2 years later, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like the natural next step. A quiet dinner, a velvet box pulled from his pocket, his eyes steady as he asked me to be his wife. I said yes through tears, already picturing my father's face when we told him. And sure enough, when we shared the news, Dad beamed. He clapped Mark on the back and said, "I knew it. I knew he was the right one." That moment sealed it for me. My heart and my father's judgment were aligned. I thought I had found forever, Not just in a husband, but in a man my father trusted, a man my family welcomed, a man who made me believe I was safe. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have even imagined, was that one day, both men would stand at the end of that aisle with secrets between them. That the blessing I thought was my protection would turn into the silence that betrayed me. If you want to understand why this betrayal destroyed me, you have to understand what my father meant to me. Dad wasn't just a parent, he was my anchor. My mom left when I was young, so it was mostly the two of us. He was the one who packed my lunches, taught me how to ride a bike, sat in the front row at every school play, even when my role was nothing more than tree number 2. He worked long hours, but somehow he always showed up. When I had my first heartbreak, he drove across town just to sit on my bedroom floor with a tub of ice cream and reminded me that a man who makes you cry isn't worth your time. When I got into college, he was the one who cried harder than me. His voice shaped the way I saw the world. His approval wasn't just important, it was everything. So when I started dating Mark, I was nervous about introducing them. It wasn't just about whether my dad liked him, it was about whether my dad believed in him. Because if David didn't see it, I couldn't trust it either. But when he met Mark, everything changed. He liked him instantly. He laughed at his jokes, asked him questions, and afterward pulled me aside in the kitchen. I'll never forget the way he said it. "Jean, he's the kind of man who'll protect you. If you found someone like that, don't let him go." That sentence became gospel to me, because if my father believed in him, how could I not? From then on, Mark wasn't just my boyfriend, he was part of the family. My dad included him in projects around the house, handed him a wrench like they were already father and son. And every time Mark showed up at Sunday dinners or family barbecues, Dad's eyes would soften, like he was finally at peace knowing I wasn't alone anymore. When Mark proposed, it wasn't just me saying yes, it was us, me and my father, both placing our faith in the same man. That's why the moment my father walked me down the aisle meant so much to me. It wasn't just tradition, it wasn't just a ritual, it was symbolic. It was Dad fulfilling the promise he'd made my whole life, that one day he'd give me away. But only if it was to the right man. I remember gripping his arm, feeling the steady weight of his hand over mine and thinking, this is it. This is safety. This is trust. When we reached the altar and he placed my hand in Mark's, I thought it was the final seal, the blessing that mattered most. And as I looked at my father, then at my husband, I told myself there was no way both of them could be wrong. There was no way the two men I trusted most would lead me astray. But I know now what I didn't then. Silence can be its own kind of betrayal. And sometimes the hands that guide you forward are the same hands holding back the truth. The first crack in the dream showed up sooner than I ever expected. On our honeymoon. It was supposed to be perfect. A week in a resort by the ocean, no distractions, no responsibilities. Just me and Mark, let's keep calling him that, celebrating the start of forever. I had pictured it down to the smallest detail, us lying in hammocks, sipping cocktails with ridiculous umbrellas, laughing about how we'd tell our kids someday about the trip that started it all. For the first couple of days, it was just that. We slept in late, ordered breakfast to the room, walked along the shoreline with our feet in the surf. I remember thinking, this is it. This is happiness. This is what people mean when they talk about starting a life together. But then the nights started to get strange. On our third night, I woke up to find the bed empty. At first, I thought maybe he had gone to the bathroom or gotten a drink. But when I listened, I heard his voice, low, muffled. He was on the balcony, phone pressed to his ear, whispering. I glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. When I opened the sliding door, he jumped like he'd been caught. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoided my eyes. "Just work stuff. Some things came up. Go back to bed." Work stuff. At 2 a.m. on our honeymoon. I wanted to believe him, so I tried. I crawled back under the sheets and told myself I was overreacting. But once the seed of doubt is planted, it grows. The next night, it happened again. His phone lit up on the nightstand around midnight. When I shifted, pretending to still be asleep, he grabbed it too quickly, slipped out of bed. Minutes later, I could hear his voice in the bathroom, hushed, urgent. This time, I confronted him. Why are you on your phone all night? Who keeps calling you? His expression hardened. Jean, you're being ridiculous. You can't handle me having work calls. Do you want to start our marriage by acting insecure? The words cut deeper than he knew. Insecure. Ridiculous. Dramatic. He said them so calmly, so firmly, that part of me almost believed it. Maybe I was being insecure. Maybe I was the one ruining our honeymoon by asking too many questions. But deep down, something felt wrong. When we got home, the doubts followed me. I found myself checking his phone when he showered, not scrolling through every message, just glancing at notifications. There were names I didn't recognize, messages deleted, and every time I asked, he gave the same answer. Work. Always work. I tried to shake it off. I tried to bury it under the joy of being newly married, but the harder I tried, the louder the doubts became. Finally, I did what I'd always done when life felt uncertain. I went to my father. We sat at his kitchen table, the same one where I'd shared every worry since childhood. My hand shook as I told him everything. The late-night calls, the balcony whispers, the gaslighting. I expected anger. I expected him to defend me, to say, "That doesn't sound right. Let's figure this out." Instead, he sighed. He reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "Jean, don't ruin your marriage before it begins. You've always been quick to worry. Mark's a good man. Don't start pulling at threads that don't need pulling." His words silenced me, because if even my father, the man whose judgment I trusted above my own, didn't see a problem, maybe there wasn't one. But that night, lying awake in bed, his words rattled inside me. Don't ruin your marriage before it begins. Why was he so quick to defend Mark? Why did he sound so certain, so final, like he knew more than he was saying? I told myself I was imagining it, that he just wanted to protect me from unnecessary heartbreak, but a small, persistent voice whispered something darker. Maybe he already knew. And though I didn't realize it then, that whisper would come back to me later, louder, undeniable. The hardest part of suspicion isn't the not knowing. It's the tug of war inside you, the battle between what your gut screams and what the people you trust most tell you to believe. For weeks after the honeymoon, I lived in that tug of war. One moment, I'd see something that twisted my stomach, Mark slipping into the hallway when his phone rang, or shutting his laptop the instant I walked into the room. And then the next moment, I'd hear my father's steady voice in my head. Don't ruin your marriage before it begins. You've always been quick to worry. I wanted so badly to believe him, to believe both of them. But the cracks were spreading. When Mark and I went out to dinner with friends, they noticed it too. After he excused himself to take yet another phone call, one of my closest girlfriends leaned toward me and whispered, "Jean, he seems distracted. Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "He's just busy with work." But her eyes lingered on mine, full of questions I didn't want to answer. Another friend said softly, "You deserve his full attention, especially now. Don't let him brush you off." Their concern rattled me. Because if strangers could see it, if people outside of our marriage could sense the distance, then maybe it wasn't just in my head. That night, I drove to my father's house. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd bandaged my scraped knees and helped me with homework, and I spilled everything. "Dad, my friends are noticing it too. The calls, the way he pulls away. It's not just me." He shook his head, calm and certain. "Jean, people love to pick apart new marriages. They look for problems where there aren't any. You need to stop listening to outside voices. Mark is a good man." "But Dad," "No buts," he said firmly. "Every marriage has bumps in the beginning. Don't let other people plant seeds of doubt in yours." His words landed like concrete, heavy and final, and because it was my father, because he'd always been the voice of reason in my life, I let them bury me. I told myself my friends were overreacting. That I was overreacting. That maybe this was just what marriage looked like in the early days. Adjustment, distraction, missed signals. I wanted so desperately for him to be right. Because if he wasn't, then the alternative was unbearable. So I convinced myself I was wrong. I laughed off my friend's comments. I swallowed my doubts when Mark slipped out of bed to take another late-night call. I told myself this was normal, that I just had to settle into the rhythm of married life. But even as I silenced myself, a tension coiled inside me, pulling tighter with each denial. Because deep down, beneath all the reassurances and excuses, I knew the truth. My instincts weren't lying, and the day would come when no amount of my father's calm words could muffle them anymore. By the time our first anniversary rolled around, I told myself the worst was behind us. Mark had been busier than ever, yes. There were still late-night calls, still moments where he seemed half-present, but I'd gotten good at burying my doubts. My father's words echoed whenever suspicion crept in. Don't ruin your marriage before it begins. So I didn't. I pushed it down. I smiled through it. I chose to believe. We planned a small weekend trip to celebrate. Just the two of us, tucked away in a cabin in the woods. No phones, no emails. At least that was the promise. On our first night there, while Mark showered, I searched for the bottle of wine we'd brought. In his bag, tucked beneath folded shirts, I found something else. His old phone, the one he told me he'd traded in months before. I don't know what made me pick it up. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation. But my hands shook as I powered it on, expecting a dead battery. The screen lit up, and with it, my world cracked open. There were messages. Hundreds of them. Names I didn't recognize. Threads that stretched back months, even years. And then I saw the dates. 2 weeks before our wedding, the night of his bachelor party, the morning after our rehearsal dinner. Photos, messages, words that made my stomach twist. I can't stop thinking about you. Wish it were you walking down that aisle. The proof was undeniable. Mark hadn't just betrayed me after the honeymoon. He'd been betraying me all along, even before I walked toward him in that white dress. I dropped the phone as though it burned. My chest tightened, my throat closing like I couldn't breathe. All the suspicions, all the whispers I'd buried, here they were, shouting in black and white. When Mark came out of the bathroom, towel slung around his waist, I couldn't even look at him. My voice shook as I asked, "How long?" His eyes flicked to the phone on the bed, and for the first time, he didn't try to lie. He just sat down, elbows on his knees, and muttered, "I never wanted you to find out this way." Not no, not you're wrong. Just a quiet, defeated confirmation. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped me out from the inside. The next morning, I drove home early, leaving him behind in that cabin. And I did what I always did when life shattered. I went to my father. Dad opened the door, surprised to see me, but I didn't waste time. I sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd given me every piece of advice in my life, and I told him everything. I told him about the phone, the messages, the proof. My voice cracked as I begged, "Dad, what do I do? How do I move on from this?" I expected outrage, anger. I expected him to stand up, slam his fist on the table, curse the man who had hurt his daughter. Instead, he was calm. Too calm. He poured me a cup of tea, slid it across the table, and said softly, "Jean, marriages are complicated. Sometimes people make mistakes. What matters is whether you can work through them." I stared at him, stunned. Work through them? He cheated before the wedding, Dad. Before you walked me down that aisle. His eyes flickered. Just for a second. And that's when the suspicion hit me like a tidal wave. "You knew." My voice was barely a whisper. He didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched. His hands tightened around his mug. Finally, after what felt like forever, he nodded. "Yes, I knew." The world tilted. "You knew?" My voice broke. "You knew he was cheating, and you still walked me down that aisle?" He didn't meet my eyes. It wasn't just Mark who betrayed me. It was David, my father. The man who promised all my life he'd protect me. And instead of protecting me, he handed me to a man already breaking me. The betrayal wasn't just in the lies Mark told. It was in the silence my father chose. And sitting there at that kitchen table, the same one where I'd trusted him all my life, I realized I hadn't just lost my husband. I'd lost my father too. I sat across from my father, my whole body trembling. The kitchen where I'd once felt safest, where he'd taught me to braid bread dough, where he'd helped me with algebra, where he'd held me after my first heartbreak, now felt like a courtroom. And he was on trial. "You knew," I said again, louder this time, my voice breaking. "You knew before the wedding." Dad sighed, rubbing a hand over his face like the weight of years pressed against his skin. He looked older, smaller, but his words were steady. "I didn't just know, Jean. I confronted him." The air left my lungs. "You what?" "Weeks before the wedding. I found out. Don't ask how. It doesn't matter. I pulled him aside, man to man. I told him if he was playing games with you, it had to end. Right there. Right then." My heart pounded in my ears. I could picture it. My father, the man who had always sworn he'd protect me, sitting across from my fiancé, speaking in low, serious tones. And then, choosing silence. Dad went on. He admitted he had made mistakes. He said it was over, that he wanted to start fresh, that he loved you and was ready to be the husband you deserved. I closed my eyes. The words felt like acid. "And you believed him." I wanted to believe him. My father corrected softly. "Jean, you were so happy. I thought, what good would it do to destroy that? To blow up your wedding, your future, your dream? If he was really willing to change, wasn't it worth giving him that chance?" His voice cracked at the end, but mine sharpened. "Worth it? Worth gambling my life on his promises? Worth walking me down that aisle knowing the vows were already broken?" He flinched. For years I'd thought of my father as my shield, the man who would protect me from everything. But in that moment, I saw the truth. He hadn't protected me. He'd protected Mark. He'd protected the image of a perfect wedding, the illusion of happiness, the story he thought I wanted to live. And in doing so, he betrayed me. "You didn't just stay silent," I whispered. "You gave me away. You put my hand in his knowing it didn't belong there." Dad's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't feel pity. "Not then." He said, "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought love could survive mistakes, that your marriage could be stronger if you didn't start it broken. I thought silence was mercy." Silence. Mercy. But that's not what it was. It was complicity. Because by staying silent, he wasn't protecting me. He was protecting Mark. He was protecting the lie. And suddenly, the betrayal wasn't just my husband's, it was my father's. Mark had broken vows, but David had broken blood. I sat there, staring at the man I'd trusted more than anyone in the world, and realized that the safety I thought I'd had all my life was a mirage. The father who promised he'd always protect me had decided my peace was less important than his silence. And in that moment, the foundation of my world collapsed. Not just my marriage, but my family. Not just my faith in love, but my faith in the one man I thought would never hurt me. I hadn't just been betrayed by vows, I had been betrayed by blood. After that night at my father's kitchen table, I knew there was no saving what had been lost. I filed for divorce, not with fireworks or dramatic ultimatums, just paperwork, quiet signatures, the dismantling of vows that had been broken before they were ever spoken. Mark didn't fight it. Maybe he knew he didn't have the right. Maybe he was relieved the game was over. Ending my marriage was painful, but clear. It was a wound with a name, a betrayal with proof. But walking away from my father, that was harder. Because how do you divorce your blood? How do you cut ties with the man who raised you, the man who walked you into the very betrayal he knew was waiting? For weeks, I tried to make sense of it. I replayed every word he said, every justification he gave. I thought silence was mercy. I thought I was protecting you. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw the truth. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting his version of me, the happy daughter in a white dress, smiling for photos that now feel like tombstones. So I made the only choice left. I stopped answering his calls. I stopped sitting at that kitchen table, stopped walking into that house where safety had turned to silence. I didn't announce it. I didn't scream. I just left. The same way I left Mark. Quietly. Because sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you can do. In the silence that followed, I broke. And then slowly, I began to rebuild. Therapy became my lifeline. At first, I sat in those sessions with my arms crossed, daring anyone to untangle the mess I carried. But little by little, the walls cracked. I admitted how stupid I felt for believing, how guilty I felt for ignoring my instincts, how shattered I was that the two men I trusted most had betrayed me in different but devastating ways. My therapist told me something I'll never forget. Trusting someone isn't a weakness. Their betrayal doesn't make you foolish. It makes them unworthy. That line became a turning point, because I realized I wasn't broken because I trusted. I was broken because they betrayed me. So I started piecing myself back together. I filled my apartment with light, plants in every window, books stacked on every table. I reconnected with friends who had seen the cracks before I admitted them. I laughed again, slowly, like a sound I had to relearn. And through it all, I learned to listen to myself again, to trust the voice inside me I had silenced for too long, the one that whispered at 2 a.m. on my honeymoon, the one that flinched when my father said, "Don't ruin your marriage before it begins." That voice wasn't paranoia, it was truth. And next time, I won't ignore it. I don't know if my father regrets his choice. Maybe he still believes silence was mercy. Maybe he tells himself he did it out of love. But love doesn't cover lies. Love doesn't hand you over to pain and call it protection. And I don't know what Mark tells himself. Maybe he thinks he made mistakes. Maybe he thinks I'll eventually forgive. But forgiveness isn't owed to people who built your forever on foundations of sand. What I do know is this. Sometimes betrayal doesn't just come from the one who cheats. It comes from the one who stays silent. And I've decided I won't live my life in silence anymore, because I'd rather walk alone than be led by hands that knew the truth and let me fall.